Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all here. Hello and welcome. I hope you can hear me now. My name is Zosia Wanat. I am a reporter at Sifted, which is a Financial Times-backed news site for European startups and VC markets. And I'm delighted to be here today with you to discuss the topic which I think is on the top of mind and on the top of the agenda of many European startups, the international growth. We will try to answer the questions of how and when is the best time to expand your startup's operations globally, and what could be the challenges ahead. And to do that, I'm joined today by this great panel of speakers, the real practitioners behind the issue. Hanna, Federico, Pedro, welcome. It's so great that you're here with us today. And before we start the actual discussion, I will just let you introduce yourselves. Could you just tell us a little bit, like 2 sentences about yourselves and the organizations that you're representing? Pedro, would you like to start?
All right, with pleasure. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm Pedro. I'm one of the partners at Armilar Venture Partners. We're a VC firm based here in Portugal, investing throughout Europe at the early stage. And having been around for 20-something years investing at the early stage, we've had the privilege of taking a few companies from very, very early stage, from inception, to becoming global companies, international companies at a very large scales.
Perfect, thank you. Federico?
Yeah, I'm the CEO of EIT Digital, which is part of the European Institute of Innovation and Technology. We are the largest digital innovation ecosystem in Europe. We bring together about 500 startups, 350 private organizations like research centers, corporates, and universities. And our ambition is to create unicorns starting from students. And that's why today is very relevant, because our ambition is to create a generation of companies starting from Europe able to become worldwide players. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. And Hanna?
I'm Hanna, co-founder and CEO of Localyze. And Localyze is a company that helps other companies basically bring their talent across borders. So like we support with everything from immigration, housing, also solving questions around like tax, compliance. And we started in 2019, have expanded across 12 markets, have a team that's based across Europe and North America. And so the topic around globalization is very close to my heart.
Perfect, thank you so much. And maybe let me start with the question which might be a little bit counterintuitive. So I would like to ask you if the European startups actually have to, if they must go global. I mean, do you think that this is a necessity for all the startups here in Europe? And like maybe they can thrive here on the European market instead, you know, of like expanding heavily on other global markets? And if that's the case, I mean, you know, what are the sectors you think, or like the types of startups that could sort of thrive in those two models? Maybe Hanna, yeah. Maybe you can start now.
I love the question. It's I do think like it's very individual, and if you have to do it, when and also how really depends on the individual company setting, the industry you're in, also your fundraising journey, because ultimately if you look at Localyze, we had a first kind of like step outside of our core market, which was Germany, already in our first year, but simply because we got accepted into Y Combinator. And so like then you spend time in the US, it makes sense to look at the market, but then you have to decide, okay, like do I already start to like adapt the product for the market? Do I start like to do go to market? And so I think like they're really like asking yourself, how much cash do you have? Because also really going global is not cheap and really has to be planned carefully, but also like what are the milestones? Is it a distraction maybe? Like what are the things that you actually have to achieve for the next round, like for your next like, growth journey?
Perfect, thank you. Federico?
Yeah, well, to answer your question, I don't think it's a necessity. It's of course our dream that we have more European companies making it at a global level, but I don't think it's a necessity, and I don't think it's really what everyone should do. Europe is probably one of the largest markets, very fragmented, so I would first, taking into account all what Anna said, that you need to take into account your sector, your maturity stage, but all that being said, I will first try to consolidate in Europe, because after you make it in such a diverse market in Europe, like Europe, you can probably scale everywhere. It's much easier. I mean, Europe is a tough market. And if there is a sector where I think Europe can be really leading, I think it's the fintech. The fintech, when you present our solutions everywhere outside of the European Union, we see that European technology, European use cases, the fact that we bring a lot of values like privacy and security into technologies are really well perceived abroad. So if I was running a fintech, I would strongly consider that. In other sectors, maybe I would take my time first. But it's definitely an interesting aspect to consider, and there is no single answer, I would say.
Sure, perfect, thank you.
Well, look, I think the objective answer to your question has to be no, right? So there's not a need to be global if there's plenty of European successes. Europe is large, so there's plenty of success stories of companies building country by country, and if the ambition is to be a European champion or something, so if not going global means at least being a champion in Europe, then of course the answer has to be no. You think of industries like, I don't know, real estate or employee benefits. You quote a few examples from our own portfolio, companies that are building such way. They can be very, very appealing. Having said that, if you're building a product, a technology that solves a global problem that no one else has solved at least as well as you, then the ambition has to be global, and that's where it can get disproportionately interesting, at least from a venture investor's perspective.
Perfect, thank you so much for this. So if you were a startup that wants to grow globally, you know that, when is the best time to do this? Probably your answer will be, it depends, but like, what are the circumstances when a founder should start thinking about going global?
Well, building up on the previous answer, if it's more about the product and the technology, I think, than it is about the founders or the management team's will. Again, if the product is a global product, in the sense that, again, solves something that is very relevant and that has a global applicability, then you need to start thinking it from day zero. And us being a VC based in Portugal, is obviously a small country. Portugal is not a market. It's at best it's a pilot. It's a good pilot, but it's nothing more than a pilot. It's way too small. And so the founders of successful companies here and small countries like ours cannot even afford to think of the local markets, of growing on a country by country basis. So that has taken most of the successful entrepreneurs in places like this to build the companies based on very differentiating technologies, and then you have to think global from day zero. If that is not the case, if again, because there's different regulations on a country by country basis, or because you need to put infrastructure on the ground in every country that you start doing business, so that's a different type of problem. And then of course there's no single answer. It'll depend on the local competition, again regulation, the amount of investment, etc. But in general, the moment that you're in one of those companies, the moment that you need to start thinking about internationalization is when you think that when you feel in you that your product, your technology is flexible enough that you've built in the flexibility to go into any market and adapt your product to whatever the market is throwing at you. And that is not necessarily the stage at the beginning. You start tailoring to a specific market, but when you have the flexibility to do this, then that's when you're ready to go.
Yeah, my point would be, do not go do not spread too thin. So if you go too early, then the risk that you are spreading yourself instead of creating a critical mass in your domestic market is too risky. So I would first address a couple of markets in Europe, maybe starting from a small one and then evolving to a bigger one. That's first something you should consider. But then also going internationally is pretty broad. I mean, the world is huge. So if you want to go to the US or to China, it's completely different. The market is different, regulations are different, the language is different. So first you need to do a very strong research and find where the market is and where your technology can solve a concrete problem of that market. So I think it needs to be also very well thought through. It's not something that you can improvise. So it takes time, and it's a decision that needs to be taken after you have proven yourself in a market, especially starting from Europe. As I said, it is so diverse that you can test already in quite a diverse framework before going abroad. So that would be my point.
And Hanna, maybe what was your story?
Yeah, I would maybe slightly disagree, because I think like we very often talk about going too early and like you have to prove yourself. It could be a distraction, but also there is an argument for saying you shouldn't go too late, because when you have a heavy focus in a market and also grow your team there, the change process that you need to take your company through is much bigger, because then you need to change the mindset. Like you need to get people to think internationally. You need to have like hire people from other markets, and like simple things like language. If you have a strong focus in one market, for us it was a very real thing. Like we started building out a team in Germany, and even though we hired internationals from the beginning, there were teams that were like purely German, and so they started to like create their documentation in German, and then at some point we had to change it. Like luckily we were still very small, so like that was easier, but also I think like from a like mindset perspective, that leads you to think differently on the product side, for example, again. And so I think those are really arguments to also say like, hey, you don't have to, it doesn't always have to be a really like big endeavor where you put a lot of money in it, where you scale a sales team somewhere. It could also be really like strategically thinking about like creating a small hub somewhere else, like specifically hiring other people into your teams, like to directly get that mindset and like start building an organization with a global mindset from the get-go.
And then again, building on your experience of expanding your startup, what did you find, or what have you found the most challenging in this process?
Yeah, I think it's really like to find the balance, because it is a balance between like not doing it too early, not doing it too late. You will make mistakes on the go, and so for us, the example with the US, like when we were at Y Combinator, started to explore the US market, and then COVID happened, and so also because of that really had to focus on Europe again. But then if that hadn't happened, I think like also looking at how many resources do we put on the market, and then similar in Europe, like what are actually the, like after Germany, what was the second market that we go after? And then of course like you can do a lot of research, but then it's still, there is like an uncontrollable part, because with a very new product, it's a bit similar to like starting a company from scratch again, because you don't know exactly how that market will behave. And so I think like there, you have to be super careful, because you can waste a lot of time and money. But yeah, like at some point you have to do it. So it's really like finding the right balance.
And for, like in the startups that you've been supporting on the way, what do you think has been the biggest challenge for them?
Okay, well, I mean, there's the obvious, the usual suspects like regulation, the investment, etc. But I would highlight one that is sometimes overlooked, which is cultural differences. When you go into a new market, you need to be aware of it. And I'm not just talking the customers, you know, which will be different, how to approach, how to sell is different in every culture, of course. But I'm also thinking internally, how to attract talent, how to retain talent, how to incentivize talent. And when we think of internationalization, we're, for the most part, thinking about sales, right? And so you're gonna start thinking of how to hire a local sales team. And you know, salespeople, almost by definition, are good at selling themselves. So if you don't know enough to know the differences, it's very easy and all too common to make mistakes that turn out very expensive, because you wake up 1 year later and nothing's happened in terms of your sales in that geography, and you spent a significant amount of cash and time making that investment. So those mistakes happen all too often. That needs to be taken care of. So leverage whatever your investor network, you know, use local resources that are knowledgeable of the local culture to be able to minimize those mistakes. You still do them, but at least try to do your best to minimize them.
Yeah, if I have to name three, I would of course start from the talents and the skills. I agree. I mean, if you expand, you really need to have a team that drives the change, a team with the right mindset as well. It's not only about the knowledge and the ability. It's really a combination of skills that is pretty unique. So if you don't go with the right team, okay, that's already the first issue, and we saw it many times. Then going abroad is very cash intensive. So you need to be really prepared and make sure that you have the financial means to make it. and then knowing the market. I mean, it's not easy, it's not the same everywhere. You need to go where the market is requesting your service, but also you need to study that market, you have to know it, almost like a local. Otherwise, yeah, if there's no market, it doesn't really make sense. So these, I think, are three elements that we observe in many cases were not contemplated from the beginning, and they were, in the end, the showstopper of many cases.
Sure. When I speak to founders and investors, and when I ask them this particular question about the challenge, the most often actually they mention hiring. They say that hiring someone when you don't really have like a recognized brand somewhere abroad, especially if you move from Europe to the US, it is the biggest challenge. Hanna, maybe you could tell us like what has been your strategy when you've been expanding?
Yeah, I think that it is a mix always between hiring people in the countries, but also making sure that you spend enough time, let's say like with the existing team, so that you have the right connection, but also de-risk it. So basically, if you hire someone in the market, it's a market that you don't know, maybe like, let's take sales as an example, maybe like also different sales culture, but then the market starts like doesn't perform well, and then you really have to make sure that like you have the trust in the right person, of course, and like made the right hire, but also you need to make sure that you have like enough eyes on that from headquarters, from like the core business, to really figure out like what are the issues, like how can we improve it. And so I think like that makes, sometimes it means really like also sending people over into certain markets. Sometimes it's like as simple as just really making sure that, for example, like all functions have regular meetings with the local team. And so I think like they're also organizing the organization in a way where you have that overlap, where you maybe have like ownership for certain regions, then you have like the teams, and really make sure that those really work together. Like product is a good example, because very often you need the product feedback as well, and then also you need to see, okay, like how do we balance that market now with like general feature requests from customers. And so I think like there is a risk if you don't have the right connections that the market is just not getting what it needs. Like then you have like a death trap where market is not performing, you don't want to put like more resources against it, etc. And so I think like that is really super important.
Okay. And building up a little bit on what you've said, there are obviously different types of international expansions, right? So like you can you can start selling your product in another market, you can start your operations in another market, but sometimes you also decide, or like your investors ask you to move your headquarters to another country, right? Or like split the operations between the two. I mean, what do you think, what are the reasons for each of these strategies? So when you should decide on what?
Well, for the first part of your question, I think, again, it depends on the industry. So if you're selling into a market that requires you to have infrastructure on the ground, so there's a significant amount of investment. If all you're talking about really is a sales organization, that's a different question. So you have a digital product and you want to put it on the market, you don't need to create logistics on the ground other than just a sales structure. The matter about the changing headquarters, I think today, honestly, I think it's a bit of a moot point in today's day and age. It was very much a question motivated by investors that had limitations as to where they could put their money, and if they really liked the company, they needed a company to move somewhere else to be able to make the investment. And many have moved that, or just because they want to be in the market where the industry is very, very, very active and create the headquarters there. But where you do business today, I think to a large extent is independent from where your headquarters are. And so today it needs to be a very, very strong case for you to move your headquarters, which of course is a large administrative burden. Some people, of course, there's always also the tax reasons, if that's applicable, if that is a thing for the company or the industry. But there needs to be a strong reason to do that. Otherwise, it's a matter of operations, again. What do you need on the ground to be present in that market?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the first thing is to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to have the right infrastructure. So if you have a market, you have to Yeah, I don't think there's a single rule about this. I definitely, as a European organization, I would not encourage to move the headquarters outside of Europe. I would resist the temptation from the West and the East, I would say. I would rather answer the other part, where I think it depends on the cases, but you need to know the ecosystems that you are targeting, and based on that, decide what to move there. The operation can be a strategic choice, but definitely, as also Pedro was saying, you need to have a presence. So for me, rather than moving headquarters, it's important that once you decide to make the move, that you have a full functioning, fully fledged structure that can really represent you in the country and deliver to that country. So that would be my advice, but maybe what I would also suggest to an entrepreneur moving abroad would be try to work in an ecosystem. Nowadays, it's even more important, so you don't go alone. For example, we at EIT Digital, we have an access to US market program, and we truly help European entrepreneurs that want to make that big step by connecting already to the right players, to explain in the market, connecting with experts that can give the right advices. So that's even more important than thinking about moving the headquarters or a specific part of the company.
Hanna?
Nothing to add from my side.
Okay, perfect. That's very good, because we have only almost like less than 2 minutes left, and I just would like to ask you, like, there are probably in the audience many founders who are thinking or are in the process of expanding internationally. If you were to give them one tip, like, what would you tell them? What would be this one message that they should take out of this panel? Hanna?
Mine would really be, of course, like, you have to plan things like, I don't know, put your financial model behind a new market launch, but also you have to approach it with an MVP kind of thinking. Approach it the same way that you founded your startup. Spend time in the market, try to, like, really understand the pain point. Is there any difference? Talk to customers. It's like really try and, like, dedicate some of your time to it as well, because I think, like, there is an element, that, like, uncontrollable part that I talked about before. It's also something that you as a founder can de-risk by, like, really trying to understand the problem and, like, then making sure that it's really the right decision to, like, go into that market, put resources behind it.
Federico?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is the ecosystem, so work with ecosystems, connect with ecosystem, especially in your domestic market, but also abroad. But the second one is do not look only for funding, look for customers. In the end, they will pay also your operation. So it's especially when you go international, the customer is a very important element.
Thank you.
Very quickly, in the seconds that we have left, is get on a plane and go. Take off, go there, learn the markets, listen to customers, listen to the local culture, understand and be prepared to adapt your product to the market that you're entering.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think it's a great way to wrap up this discussion. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you learned as much as I did. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing the insights. And see you soon.
Yep.
Thank you.